Let's go back to the spring of 1945. Picture this. You're an 11-year-old boy in Germany named Helmuth, and you overhear your parents having this incredibly serious, hushed conversation. They're trying to decide something terrifying. Should the entire family die, or should just his father take his own life? And then Helmuth hears his father, who was a well-respected doctor, say this one chilling line to his mother. You have to remember, the war was just about over, and his father, who was a Nazi supporter, was just filled with this absolute, paralyzing fear of what was about to happen.
The very next day, they all went on one last family picnic. And right after, Helmut's father walked into his office and shot himself. The whole thing was so traumatic that for the next 9 years, little Helmut refused to eat a single meal at home. He was terrified his own mother might poison him. Now, an event that tragic leaves us with a massive question. And to answer it, we really need to rewind.
To really get a handle on that fear, you have to go all the way back to 1918. World War I is over. Germany has lost, its emperor has bolted, and suddenly there's this huge power vacuum. And right into that chaos, a brand new form of government tries to get started. They called it the Weimar Republic, and on paper, it was actually one of the most progressive democracies on the planet. It gave all adults, women included, the right to vote. But here's the thing. For a country just shattered by war, it wasn't seen as this great step forward. No, it was seen as a symbol of their defeat. So why all the hate? Well, it was because of the peace treaty Germany was forced to sign, the Treaty of Versailles, and it was absolutely brutal. Germany lost a huge chunk of its territory, its colonies, vital resources like iron and coal, and its military was basically dismantled. But the real gut punch was the war guilt clause. Germany was forced to take the entire blame for the war and pay a staggering £6 billion in damages. People didn't see this as peace, they saw it as a national disgrace, and they blamed the new republic for signing it.
And as if that political humiliation wasn't bad enough, it was immediately followed by an economic disaster, one that would push regular German people to the absolute brink.
The problem was something called hyperinflation. See, in 1923, to try and pay off its massive debts, the German government made a terrible call. They just started printing more money, tons of it. They flooded the economy with cash, which made their currency, the mark, pretty much worthless. It got completely absurd. People were literally hauling wheelbarrows full of cash to the store just to buy a single loaf of bread. Can you imagine that? Your entire life savings, everything you and your family worked for, suddenly becoming worthless overnight. That was the reality for millions. Now, for a short time, things seemed to stabilize a bit, thanks to some loans from America. But then, 1929 happened. The Wall Street crash kicks off the Great Depression in the U.S. That American money just vanishes, and the German economy completely implodes. By 1932, the result is catastrophic. Half the country's industry is gone, and 6 million people have no job. Any faith people had left in democracy, it was totally shattered. So you've got this environment of economic ruin, political chaos, and just this deep national shame. The German people were desperate. They weren't just looking for a politician, they were looking for a savior. Someone, anyone, who promised a way out of the mess. And that's exactly when Adolf Hitler, this incredibly powerful and captivating speaker, stepped right into the spotlight. He didn't just promise to fix the economy, he promised to fix their pride. He said he would build a strong nation, tear up that hated treaty, get everyone back to work, and restore German dignity. And to a nation that felt completely broken, those promises were like a drug. And just look at the effect this had. It was staggering. In 1928, the Nazi Party was basically a fringe group with less than 3% of the vote. They were nobodies. But just 4 years later, right in the middle of the Depression, they exploded to become the single largest political party in Germany with 37% of the vote. On January 30th, 1933, Hitler was legally appointed chancellor. And from that moment on, he moved with just breathtaking speed. A month later, a suspicious fire breaks out at the Parliament building, and he uses it as an excuse to suspend all civil rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all of it. Gone. And then, just a few days after that, the Enabling Act is passed. And that was it. Democracy was dead. Hitler now had absolute dictatorial power. Now that he had total control, Hitler and the Nazis started building their new society. And it was all based on this incredibly hateful ideology. one that said there was a pure Aryan race and that everyone else, especially Jewish people, were undesirable enemies of the state. The persecution of the Jews wasn't random, you see. It was a very calculated three-stage process. It started with exclusion, passing laws like the Nuremberg laws to legally cut Jews out of society, stripping them of their rights and citizenship. Then it moved to ghettoization, forcing them out of their homes and into these horrible, isolated camps where they starved. And finally, it all culminated in annihilation, the systematic, industrial-scale mass murder known as the final solution. You know, the Nazis were absolute masters of propaganda, and they even used language to hide the true horror of what they were doing. Mass killing was called special treatment. Gas chambers were labeled disinfection areas. They created this whole bureaucratic code to mask the reality of what was happening, to make mass murder sound like paperwork. 6 million. That's how many Jewish men, women, and children were murdered in the Holocaust. And they were killed alongside millions of others the Nazis considered undesirable. Romani people, Poles, political enemies, disabled Germans. It's a number so huge, it's almost impossible to truly wrap your head around it. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. Back to that little room in 1945 with that terrified 11-year-old boy. We can finally answer the question that's been hanging over this whole story. The answer is as simple as it is chilling. Helmut's father was a Nazi. He was a part of the system that carried out these atrocities, and with the Allies closing in, he knew the game was up. Defeat was inevitable, and he was terrified of facing justice for his part in these crimes against humanity. After the war ended at the Nuremberg trials, so many Nazi officials tried to use the same excuse. I was only following orders, but the court flatly rejected that defense. It established a brand new and crucial principle in international law. You are responsible for your own actions, even if you're acting on behalf of a criminal state. The story of Nazi Germany isn't just about one evil man. It's about how an entire society can be poisoned by hate. It's about how economic desperation can make people vulnerable to the most extreme promises. And it's a terrifying reminder of how quickly a democracy can be taken apart from the inside. And it leaves us with a question that still echoes today. What is the price of silence when injustice begins to rise?